Hi.
Hi, Elon. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Thank you so much for being here. And by here, I mean
Sure. Electronically.
electronically.
My bits are there.
And where are you right now?
I'm at the Tesla Giga Texas factory that we're about to complete. So yeah, what you see behind me is the factory basically. We have the office space and the factory kind of together. So I think this is kind of important that we don't have ivory tower management or engineering, and that the management and engineering is as close to the factory as possible. So yeah, so you can see what's going on in the factory and stay grounded.
All right, well, I'm in the ivory tower here in front of a lot of CEOs and a live audience here in Washington, D.C. And we are also joined by lots of people all over the internet. We are streaming this to WSJ.com, Twitter, and YouTube. So we have a very brief amount of time, only 30 minutes, but I'm very excited to talk about a wide range of things. I want to start with talking about our world, the world we currently live in. Then I want to move to the future of the world, and then talk a little bit about your world. And so we'll start right here in Washington, D.C., where everyone is talking about the infrastructure plan and the bill. And I wanted to ask you, say tomorrow you get a phone call from Joe Biden, and he says...
I think that's unlikely, but sure.
Okay. You know, he just gives you a call, and he says, you know, I haven't been talking a lot about Tesla lately, but, you know, what do you need from this bill? What are your needs? What do you answer him?
Well, I mean, to be totally frank, I don't know if we, at least no one at Tesla has actually brought up whether they care about this bill or not. I think if this bill happened or didn't happen, I don't know. We don't think about it at all, really.
Okay.
It might be better. Honestly, it might be better if the bill doesn't pass, because we've spent so much money. You know, it's like the federal budget deficit is insane. You know, it's like $3 trillion. Federal expenditures are $7 trillion. Federal revenue is $4 trillion. That's a $3 trillion difference in. If this was a company, it'd be a $3 trillion loss. So I don't know if we should be adding to that loss. That seems pretty crazy. Something's got to give. You can't just spend $3 trillion more than you own every year and expect, you know, don't expect something bad to happen. I think, you know, this is not good.
Well, Mitch McConnell's actually saying...
In fact, if I may elaborate on that, the deficit is more than $3 trillion when you look at the future obligations. So it's $7 trillion of current expenditures, but it's much more than that if you look at future obligations for Social Security, Medicare, and so forth. So we're running this incredible deficit. Something's got to give. I don't know. This can't keep going.
Well, Mitch McConnell said something similar. That it wasn't too, not as extreme as you. But okay, so let's say his follow-up question is, okay, Elon, you don't think we need to spend anything on the infrastructure? If he says to you, what is the biggest improvement we can make to the U.S. infrastructure? What do you say?
I think we generally could have better airports, better highways, and you know, I think that especially in cities that are congested, we've got to do something to deal with the extreme traffic, which I think is some combination of double-deckering freeways and building tunnels. But if we don't do something, we will be stuck in traffic for forever. And as autonomous vehicles come to the fore, and it's easier to drive without going through the pain of having to drive yourself, which is absolutely coming, and will be one of the biggest transformations ever in human civilization. There will be more cars on the road, and the traffic will get much worse. And so we really need to do some combination of tunnels and or like I said, double-deckering freeways. I'm not a big believer in flying cars. They're basically helicopters with wheels. and people don't want the skies to be swarming with helicopters. So it's tunnels and double-deckering freeways. We don't have a traffic problem in suburbs. We have a traffic problem on freeways because they were just too small and did not anticipate the size of the urban environments that we currently experience. So, yeah, but I don't see a strong effort in this direction.
Well, I want to come back to autonomous vehicles, but want to just stay a little bit more on the role of government. You said at this conference actually a year ago that you think government should really just be hands-off when it comes to innovation. Though with this bill, there is a lot of support for EVs, and it could be the biggest change that we've seen throughout the country in terms of the infrastructure of EVs, and it helps Tesla. What do you think the role of government should be?
I think the role of government should be that of like a referee, and you know, like, but not a player on the field. Generally, you know, government should, I think, just try to get out of the way and not impede progress. I think there's a general problem, not just in the U.S., but in most countries, where the rules and regulations keep increasing every year. Rules and regulations are immortal. They don't die. There's not a natural. Occasionally, you see some law with a sunset provision, but really, otherwise, the vast majority of rules and regulations live forever. And so if more rules and regulations are applied every year, and it just keeps growing and growing, eventually it takes longer and longer, and it's harder to do things. And there's not really an effective garbage collection system for removing rules and regulations. And so gradually this hardens the arteries of civilization, where you're able to do less and less over time. So I think government should be really trying hard to get rid of rules and regulations that perhaps had some merit at some point, but don't have merit currently. But there's very little effort in this direction. This is a big problem.
And I also want to come back to later. I know that you do have some other stance on sort of AI and what the rules and regulations we should have on that. But right now you're sitting in a Tesla factory. How are you spending your time these days between the split between SpaceX and Tesla?
Yeah, it's about even between SpaceX and Tesla. It depends on, you know, what is the kind of crisis of the moment. So some weeks will be more Tesla, more SpaceX. But I mean, I work a lot. I work 7 days a week and put in I get some pretty crazy hours. So. But it really depends on where I'm needed most. I triage the tasks and try to do the things that are most useful or where I'm most needed. You know, and it varies from one week to the next. But you know, just going back to that infrastructure bill for a second, because sometimes the criticism of Tesla is like, hey, Tesla gets all these subsidies, but it's worth noting that for the vehicle purchase tax credit, the $7,500, Tesla stopped getting that like 2 years ago. So whereas everyone else, I think, except for GM, still gets the $7,500 tax credit. So all of our sales this year and I think last year had nothing to do with the tax credit because we were no longer eligible because we'd made so many electric cars. Tesla's made roughly 2/3 of all the electric cars in the United States. I'm not sure if most people are aware of that. So Tesla's made basically twice as many electric vehicles as the rest of industry combined. And we don't need the $7,500 tax credit. I would say, honestly, I would just can this whole bill. Don't pass it. That's my recommendation.
What about the support though for the charging network? I mean, there are parts of this bill. No.
No, I mean, do we need support for gas stations? We don't. So there's no need for this for support for a charging network. I would delete it. Delete.
Okay. All right.
I'm literally saying get rid of all subsidies. But also for oil and gas.
If you think about also how this affects your competitors, is that impact some of your view on this?
I mean, maybe they need it. I don't know. But I think just generally, I'm in favor of deleting subsidies. I mean, when we started Tesla, there were no EV subsidies at all, and gasoline was super cheap. We did not anticipate any subsidies. That came later, and that came the $7,500 tax credit came as a result not of Tesla activity, but of General Motors lobbying for it. So I would just say just delete them all.
All right, but there's some other good things in this bill that some would argue. I mean, a lot of money earmarked for R&D. Would you want to put that towards something?
No.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on from the bill because I think we get what you're saying on it.
In general, we should just, if we don't cut government spending, something really bad's going to happen. This is crazy. Our spending is so far in excess of revenue, it's insane. Like you could zero out all billionaires in the country. This is all this like anti-billionaire BS. If you zeroed out all the billionaires, you still wouldn't solve the deficit.
All right, I'll ask you another question around the billionaire BS. Say tomorrow we've talked. You get the phone call from President Biden. Next day, actually, we decide we elect you to Congress. Somehow this happens. You're now working on tax bills. You're working on tax policy. How do you tax someone like you? How do you tax billionaires?
I mean, first of all, I pay a lot of tax. I mean, my marginal tax rate is like 53%. So that's not trivial. And then obviously there's like, asset-based taxes, the sales tax and everything else. There's also the estate tax. I think the estate tax is a good tax. Like if you think of assets beyond a certain level that are far beyond, let's say, somebody's ability to consume, then at a certain point, really what you're doing is capital allocation. So it's not money for personal expenditures. What you're doing is capital allocation. And it does not make sense to take the job of capital allocation away from people who have demonstrated great skill in capital allocation and give it to an entity that has demonstrated very poor skill in capital allocation, which is the government. You can think of the government essentially as a corporation in the limit. The government is simply the biggest corporation with a monopoly on violence, and where you have no recourse. So how much money do you want to give that entity?
Could you explain the last part quickly, and then I want to move on to some product stuff.
Sure. I can talk for a bit longer if you'd like than the half an hour. If you're worried about getting through other questions.
I hear we have nobody else joining us at this conference.
Government is a corporation in the limit. So it is the most corporate thing. It is maximum corporation, but it's also a monopoly, and also is the only one that's allowed legally to do violence. So why would you want to give a corporation with no competition that can't even really go bankrupt more money? Now, it's not as though I think the government shouldn't exist or that they're not good things that the government can do or things that are necessary for the government to do. For example, science programs where we send a probe to Mars, and the value of that is it's a small amount of value for all citizens, but it would be inefficient to sort of go and collect $10 from every citizen for a Mars probe, and so therefore it's better to have the government do something like that, like a heavy science program, rather than try to collect small amounts of money from everyone. So I'm not somebody who's sort of an extreme libertarian and thinks the government should not do anything. I just think we should minimize what the government does, because the government's efficiency at spending is just going to be lower than a competitive commercial company, but by a lot. If you look at, say, East Germany versus West Germany, or North Korea versus South Korea, and you look at the GDP per capita of East and West Germany or North and South Korea, the difference is gigantic. And and that's just the difference between East and West Germany. It's like a random line was drawn, basically depending on where the Red Army was and where the Allied troops were, and East Germany's productivity was like at least 5 times worse than West Germany. And it's not like West Germany was like some bastion of capitalism. They were quite socialist, really. So there may be as much as an order of magnitude difference between the efficiency of a competitive private company versus the government.
I'm going to shift away from government, come back to your world. Just thinking about sort of how you juggle Tesla and SpaceX, and you've said along the way that the workload at Tesla is quite a lot. Have you? And I know now you could regain the chairman position. Have you thought about that? Have you thought about that? Have you thought about your sort of your title and your position there right now?
I mean, it's interesting that these titles. You know that there's actually only 3 titles that actually mean anything for a corporation. It's president, secretary, and treasurer, and technically they could be the same person. And all these other titles are just basically made up. So CEO is a made-up title, CFO is a made-up title, general counsel, made-up title, don't mean anything.
That's a nice. I think a room of CEOs are how we feel about that. Yep.
It was like obviously just somebody's marketing experiment. So
I guess I'll be more